And that's what happened to me when I was a little boy. I was removed from a school. Anybody ever heard of residential school or incarceration schools? It's terrible. But I was in one of those places and disconnected from my family, my community, my culture, my stories, my songs, my medicines, my horses, my pets, all these things. We had horses, there's things that I knew, there's things that I left. I loved the dogs and I loved the horses, just like that. Anything that I remembered was gone. It just disappeared. I came to a big city like this, north of here in Prince Albert, and they even did things that you wouldn't think they would have done. So they cut my hair. They cut my braids off right away. That's what they did. That's the first things they did. And then they throw me into a shower. And I'd never seen a shower before. So I'm just wondering, where's this water coming from? These little faucets, all of a sudden it's coming, it's attacking me, it's like really close. Normally it's way up from the sky, right? It's way up in the sky, but all of a sudden there's these little, and so they just basically pushed us into the shower. And you don't know how to control those things, for heat or temperature. It could get hot, right? I don't remember. And they used to paint us with white stuff. Calamine, I think, white, because they thought you were diseased. You had scabs and all that. So that's what they did. They painted everybody white. So this is shocking stuff, but it needs to be known. I'll just tell you a little bit. So when I was disconnected for 13 years, I didn't know where I belonged. I belonged in this school. That's all I knew. So to leave it was, again, kind of like, I'm going to be alone again. Where do I go? And, this being my family, even though they treated me badly, it was my home for 13 years. The way they treated me, it got better as time went. The people were mixed. They started to get indigenous people to work there, supervisors. Before that, it was mostly Anglican, just local people from the city, the Anglican people, settlers, Europeans, mostly people like that looked after me. So they were the ones that were hired. And some of them were métis that were in the kitchen. And I didn't know that till much later, but they were working in the kitchen and they were really nice people. And then they put us in the kitchen to work. As you got a little older, 12, 13, you peel potatoes and wash dishes, you got responsibilities. So you did learn a lot of things. You developed skills. Because can you imagine, coming from a world where you really didn't do dishes, you just ate with your hands, you just kind of ate that dried meat, You didn't have forks and knives and spoons. My grandmother, I'll tell you a little story. My grandmother, I met her in Meadow Lake, and she was half sister to my grandmother that raised me in Sturgeon Lake. But 25, 30 years later, or maybe even further, I wind up in Meadow Lake and I meet my my grandmother's half sister, who's my grandmother, Flora Gladue. And she says, how's my sister? I said, what did you say? My sister? Yeah, my sister. How's my sister? Oh, my grandmother? She says, oh, she passed away. I said, oh. So yeah, my grandmother, she passed away from ulcers, peptic ulcers from worrying. And she says, she was my half sister. She says, I always wanted her to leave Big River, because in Big River, the people that were raising her grandparents, were treating her bad, They didn't treat her nicely. And her half sister always wanted her removed from there. And guess who came along? My grandpa. My grandpa came along with a little horse and buggy one night, and whisked her away to Sturgeon Lake. And my grandmother swore she'll never go back to Big River. And she never did. And it's only about half hour by car, maybe about a day by wagon and horse. So my grandfather stole her. That's how the old days, olden days, if you wanted somebody, you just go and get them. Or else you get a blanket and a horse and you go to the family and you give them the horse and blanket. That was the old way of getting a partner. It's a little dowry. So my grandmother was sitting one day at home, in Big River. She was living in Big River. This other one, Flora. And her mushroom was still, wearing breechcloth. Back in the day, there was no clothing. He was just wearing breechcloth, leather, skin. And, just naked pretty well. I was sitting on the ground on Mother Earth, which was in a house, actually. But he was sitting down there. He's from the old school, olden days, you eat off the floor. You don't sit on a fancy chair, or a table. And here my grandmother's setting up the table, nicely with forks and knives and spoons and cups, peanut butter, toasted bread, And my grandfather's great-grandfather, I guess, was looking at her. No, Sim, grandchild, what are you doing? In Cree. Bring that stuff over here and put it right here. So she had to go, but she was going to school, right? She was about 12. She was already learning home economics, right? So she came down here, placed food in there and the cutlery and everything. And this guy, his old mushroom looks at this fork and this knife. Well, what are these? Puts them down and takes this peanut butter jar and just takes some bread. And these old medicine people, sometimes they have soil on their fingers, because they're working on the land, right? You know that, eh? And there he was spreading it. And my grandmother's looking at him, just kind of wincing. Said, ooh, grandfather, look at your hands. But it's soil, right? So just start eating. He says to his granddaughter, said, I'm not a little bird. Katsipatak siyan, kamitso siyan, to sit on a branch, and eat my food. It says, I'm a nihil. I'm a nihil. I eat on the ground with Mother Earth, same level.